Your married soulmate just heard something that changed everything. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Every life reaches a moment when a single conversation changes the way someone sees themselves, their relationships, and the future they imagined. This is one of those stories. Somewhere, someone sat quietly after hearing words they never expected to hear. The room had not changed. The furniture was exactly where it had always been. The clock continued ticking as if nothing important had happened. Yet inside their heart, everything felt different. They had just heard something that challenged years of assumptions, years of emotional habits, and years of believing they understood exactly what their life was supposed to become. They didn't have every answer yet, but they knew one thing with complete certainty: they could no longer ignore what their heart had been trying to tell them for a very long time. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Life often teaches its greatest lessons through ordinary moments rather than dramatic events. Sometimes it is a simple conversation with a trusted friend. Sometimes it is advice from someone who knows us well. Sometimes it is hearing another person's story and unexpectedly recognizing pieces of our own. In this story, the words they heard were not loud, but they carried extraordinary weight. Someone simply said, "You deserve to live honestly, not just comfortably." Those words echoed through their mind long after the conversation ended. They realized they had spent so much time meeting expectations that they had forgotten to ask themselves what genuine peace actually felt like. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. For many years they believed responsibility meant ignoring their own emotions. They believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. They believed that if they simply worked harder, smiled more often, and avoided difficult conversations, everything would eventually feel right. But emotional truth has a remarkable way of waiting patiently beneath the surface. It does not disappear simply because it is ignored. Instead, it grows quieter, deeper, and more persistent until one ordinary day it asks to be acknowledged. As they reflected, memories began returning unexpectedly. They remembered conversations with someone who always encouraged honesty instead of appearances. They remembered feeling genuinely understood without needing to explain every thought. They remembered moments where kindness felt effortless and respect flowed naturally. Those memories stood in sharp contrast to the emotional exhaustion they had quietly accepted as normal. For the first time, they wondered whether peace should feel more natural than struggle. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. This story is not about abandoning commitments for fantasy. It is about someone confronting their own emotional reality with honesty. They began asking difficult questions they had avoided for years. Am I living according to my deepest values? Am I communicating honestly with the people I love? Am I becoming the person I hope to become? Those questions did not arrive to create chaos. They arrived to create clarity. Growth often begins with uncomfortable self-reflection rather than immediate certainty. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. One evening they sat quietly after everyone else had gone to sleep. The silence felt different than before. Instead of reaching for distractions, they allowed themselves to think honestly. They remembered a person from their past whose presence had always inspired calm rather than confusion. They remembered someone who listened carefully, respected boundaries, and encouraged personal growth. It wasn't about comparing people. It was about recognizing qualities they deeply valued but had gradually stopped prioritizing in their own life. They realized that meaningful relationships are not sustained by routine alone. They require openness, mutual respect, patience, and the willingness to continue learning about one another. Somewhere along the way they had confused stability with emotional connection. They had forgotten that true partnership grows through honest conversations, shared understanding, and consistent care. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Over the following days they noticed subtle changes within themselves. They became more thoughtful before speaking. They listened more carefully to those around them. They stopped reacting immediately and began responding intentionally. Instead of blaming circumstances, they accepted responsibility for their own choices. They understood that while they could not rewrite yesterday, they could choose how they would live tomorrow. One afternoon they came across an old notebook filled with personal goals. As they turned each page, they noticed how many dreams focused on achievement, success, and responsibility. Yet very few focused on inner peace, authentic communication, or emotional well-being. That realization surprised them. They had spent years building an impressive life on the outside while quietly neglecting the conversations their own heart had been asking them to have. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. They also realized that genuine kindness leaves lasting impressions. They remembered someone whose quiet compassion had once inspired them to believe that healthy communication was possible. They remembered how respected they had felt simply because someone took the time to truly listen. Those memories became less about the past and more about the kind of future they hoped to create, one built upon honesty, empathy, and mutual respect. The more they reflected, the clearer everything became. The words they had heard days earlier continued echoing within them: "You deserve to live honestly, not just comfortably." Those words were no longer simply advice. They had become an invitation to examine every part of life with greater courage. They understood that pretending everything was fine would no longer bring peace. Authenticity required action, beginning with truthful conversations and compassionate self-awareness. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They no longer viewed difficult conversations as threats. Instead, they began seeing them as opportunities to strengthen trust, resolve misunderstandings, and build healthier relationships. They understood that honesty expressed with kindness creates possibilities that silence never can. They wanted every important relationship in their life to reflect openness rather than assumption and respect rather than avoidance. As this chapter comes to its close, they stand at the beginning of something entirely new. Not because every answer has appeared overnight, but because they have finally chosen to stop running from the questions. They have realized that meaningful change rarely begins with dramatic events. It begins with one honest conversation, one courageous decision, and one quiet commitment to live with greater integrity than ever before. Whatever the future holds, they now understand that authentic relationships are built not on fear, but on truth, compassion, consistent effort, and the courage to become the best version of oneself. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. The words they had heard refused to leave their mind. Days passed, yet the conversation continued echoing through every quiet moment. It wasn't because someone had told them what to do. It was because someone had asked a question they could no longer avoid. When was the last time you were completely honest with yourself? At first, they tried to dismiss it. They buried themselves in routines, responsibilities, and familiar habits. They smiled when people expected them to smile. They completed every task that needed attention. From the outside, everything appeared exactly as it always had. But inside, something had shifted forever. A part of them had awakened, and it was asking for a life built upon authenticity rather than appearances. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They began noticing how often people confuse routine with peace. Routine creates predictability. Peace creates freedom. Routine can exist even when the heart feels exhausted. Peace exists when actions, values, and emotions begin working together instead of pulling in different directions. For years they had believed those two things were the same. Now they understood they were completely different. They realized that living responsibly should never require abandoning emotional honesty. Genuine strength is not pretending everything is fine. Genuine strength is having the courage to acknowledge when something inside needs attention. One evening they found themselves sitting quietly after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was still. The silence felt almost unfamiliar. Instead of reaching for another distraction, they simply allowed themselves to think. Memories surfaced naturally. They remembered conversations with someone who had always encouraged openness. They remembered feeling respected even during disagreements. They remembered how easy it had felt to share ideas without fear of being misunderstood. Those memories did not arrive to create regret. They arrived to remind them what healthy communication could look like. For the first time in years, they realized they had been missing not excitement, but emotional understanding. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. As these reflections continued, they became more aware of their own habits. They noticed how often they avoided difficult conversations because they feared conflict. They realized they frequently assumed other people understood their feelings without ever expressing them clearly. They expected closeness to survive without intentional effort. Looking back, they understood that meaningful relationships require continual care. Respect grows through listening. Trust grows through honesty. Emotional safety grows when both people are willing to speak openly, even when those conversations feel uncomfortable. The realization was humbling. Instead of blaming circumstances, they accepted responsibility for the parts of the story they could control. They admitted that silence had sometimes become easier than vulnerability. They admitted that fear had occasionally spoken louder than courage. Yet rather than allowing guilt to consume them, they chose to learn from those mistakes. They understood that maturity begins the moment a person stops searching for excuses and starts embracing accountability. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. During this season of self-reflection, they also began changing small things about their daily life. They spent less time rushing through conversations. They looked people in the eye when they spoke. They became fully present instead of constantly thinking about the next responsibility waiting for them. They thanked people more often. They apologized sincerely when necessary. They discovered that these small acts slowly transformed the atmosphere around them. Kindness multiplied. Patience increased. Relationships became more genuine because they were finally showing up as their authentic self. One afternoon they walked through a quiet park, watching families laugh together, children chase one another across the grass, and older couples sit peacefully on nearby benches. Nothing extraordinary was happening, yet something about the simplicity of those moments touched them deeply. They realized that happiness is rarely hidden inside dramatic events. More often it grows through ordinary moments shared with honesty, mutual respect, and consistent care. Those observations reminded them of someone whose calm presence had once made ordinary conversations feel meaningful. They smiled softly, appreciating how certain people quietly shape our understanding of what genuine connection feels like. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. The more they reflected, the more they recognized that emotional honesty is not about making impulsive decisions. It is about living with integrity. It is about ensuring that words and actions reflect the same values. They no longer wanted to avoid difficult truths simply because they were uncomfortable. They wanted every important relationship in their life to become healthier through better communication rather than weaker through prolonged silence. They also discovered that compassion begins with understanding ourselves honestly. For years they had judged themselves harshly whenever they made mistakes. Now they practiced a different approach. They acknowledged errors without allowing those errors to define their identity. They understood that growth is impossible without grace. Every lesson became an opportunity to become wiser rather than another reason to remain trapped inside regret. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They started writing every evening, not because someone asked them to, but because putting thoughts onto paper helped them recognize patterns they had never noticed before. Again and again, one theme appeared throughout their journal. They longed for relationships built upon openness, trust, and emotional safety. They no longer wanted conversations filled with assumptions. They wanted understanding. They no longer wanted people pretending everything was fine. They wanted authenticity. Reading those pages, they realized how much they had changed over the past year. As weeks passed, they noticed another transformation. They became less interested in impressing others and more interested in genuinely connecting with them. Success still mattered. Responsibility still mattered. But they no longer wanted achievement to come at the expense of meaningful relationships. They understood that life's greatest accomplishments often have little to do with titles or recognition. They are found in the ability to love with kindness, communicate with honesty, forgive with humility, and live according to one's deepest values. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. They remembered something someone once told them: the people who change your life rarely do it through one extraordinary moment. They change it through countless ordinary moments where they consistently choose kindness. Those words suddenly carried new meaning. They realized that the most influential people in their life had not been the loudest voices. They had been the calmest hearts. The ones who listened carefully. The ones who respected boundaries. The ones who inspired growth without demanding perfection. Those quiet examples became the standard by which they now measured every meaningful relationship. By the end of this chapter, they understood that the conversation which had changed everything was never really about hearing new information. It was about finally becoming ready to accept a truth that had been waiting patiently inside them all along. They deserved to live with honesty. They deserved relationships built on mutual respect. They deserved conversations filled with openness rather than fear. Most importantly, they realized that every meaningful connection in life becomes stronger when people choose courage over silence, compassion over judgment, and authenticity over appearances. That realization did not solve every question overnight, but it became the foundation for every wiser decision they would make from that day forward. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. The conversation that had changed everything was no longer just a memory. It had become a mirror. Every day they looked into that mirror and saw not only the life they had built but also the person they were becoming. For years they had measured success by responsibilities fulfilled, promises kept, and expectations met. They believed that if everyone around them was satisfied, then they must be living correctly. But now another question quietly followed them everywhere they went. Am I living honestly? That question was impossible to silence. It appeared during early mornings before the world woke up. It appeared during long drives when the road stretched endlessly ahead. It appeared during quiet evenings when there were no distractions left to hide behind. The more they asked themselves that question, the more they realized that authenticity is not a destination someone reaches once. It is a decision made repeatedly, one conversation, one choice, and one act of courage at a time. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They began noticing details they had ignored for years. They noticed how often people spoke without really listening. They noticed how many smiles concealed exhaustion. They noticed how frequently fear disguised itself as routine. Most importantly, they noticed how easily people settled for emotional distance simply because it had become familiar. Looking around, they realized they had done the same thing. They had accepted silence where honest conversations should have existed. They had accepted assumptions where understanding should have grown. They had accepted comfort instead of pursuing genuine connection. That realization was painful, but it also brought hope because recognizing a problem is often the first step toward changing it. One afternoon they met an elderly couple sitting together in a small cafe. The two of them spoke very little, yet every glance carried warmth and respect. There was no need for dramatic gestures because years of kindness had created quiet trust. Watching them reminded this person that lasting relationships are rarely sustained through excitement alone. They survive because two people continue choosing patience during difficult seasons, honesty during uncomfortable conversations, forgiveness after mistakes, and appreciation during ordinary days. That simple observation stayed with them long after they left the cafe. It reminded them that love is less about extraordinary moments and more about consistent character. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. As these reflections continued, memories from the past appeared with new meaning. They remembered someone whose presence always encouraged honesty instead of performance. Someone who never pressured them to become someone else. Someone who believed that people grow best when they feel safe enough to be themselves. They realized that those moments had quietly shaped their understanding of healthy connection. They were no longer comparing people. Instead, they were comparing values. They now understood the difference between relationships built upon appearances and relationships built upon authenticity. For the first time in years, they stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" Instead, they asked, What is this experience teaching me? That single change transformed everything. Every disappointment became a lesson in resilience. Every misunderstanding became a lesson in communication. Every difficult season became an opportunity to discover strengths they never realized they possessed. Instead of becoming bitter, they became curious. Instead of holding on to resentment, they chose reflection. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They also realized that growth often requires humility. It required admitting they did not always communicate clearly. It required acknowledging moments when fear influenced important decisions. It required accepting that even good intentions cannot replace honest conversations. Those realizations were not easy, yet they carried a strange sense of freedom. Once they stopped pretending they had all the answers, they finally became willing to learn. One evening they opened an old photo album that had remained untouched for years. Each photograph captured a different chapter of life. Some pictures brought laughter. Others brought quiet nostalgia. But what affected them most was not the images themselves. It was remembering how quickly those moments had passed. They understood that life never pauses long enough for us to appreciate everything while it is happening. That realization strengthened their commitment never again to leave appreciation unspoken. They wanted the important people in their life to know they were valued while there was still time to tell them. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. Slowly they began rebuilding relationships through simple but meaningful actions. They asked sincere questions instead of making assumptions. They listened without interrupting. They apologized without defending themselves. They thanked people for ordinary acts of kindness that had previously gone unnoticed. These changes seemed small, yet they transformed the atmosphere around them. Trust grew stronger. Conversations became deeper. People responded with greater openness because authenticity often invites authenticity in return. As they continued changing, they also became gentler with themselves. They stopped measuring their worth by perfection. They accepted that everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone chooses to learn from them. Every difficult chapter had shaped them into someone more compassionate. Every challenge had increased their empathy for others who were carrying unseen struggles. They realized that emotional maturity is not about never failing. It is about responding to failure with honesty, accountability, and a willingness to grow. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. There were still moments when uncertainty remained. They did not suddenly possess every answer about the future. But they no longer feared uncertainty the way they once had. They had discovered that peace does not come from controlling every outcome. Peace comes from knowing your choices reflect your deepest values. Whether tomorrow brought easy conversations or difficult ones, they wanted every decision to be guided by integrity rather than fear. One quiet morning, while watching sunlight fill the room, they smiled to themselves. They realized the words that had once shaken their heart had become the foundation of a completely new way of living. They were no longer simply trying to maintain relationships. They were learning how to nurture them. They were no longer trying to avoid uncomfortable emotions. They were learning how to understand them. They were no longer searching for a perfect life. They were building an honest one. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. Think about how many people spend years searching for happiness while overlooking the simple habits that create it. A kind word spoken at the right time. A sincere apology. A grateful heart. A willingness to listen without judgment. A conversation where both people feel safe enough to tell the truth. These ordinary moments become the foundation of extraordinary relationships. They understood that now more clearly than ever before. As this chapter comes to its close, they carried one truth with complete confidence. The conversation that changed everything was never really about hearing someone else's wisdom. It was about finally recognizing the wisdom their own heart had been whispering for years. They understood that meaningful relationships deserve attention before distance grows, honesty before misunderstanding spreads, appreciation before opportunities disappear, and courage before fear becomes habit. Whatever the future held, they were determined that every important relationship in their life would be shaped not by silence or assumption, but by compassion, authenticity, mutual respect, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing truth every single day. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Every meaningful story reaches a point where reflection becomes action, where lessons become choices, and where the person who once lived on autopilot decides they will never again ignore what their heart has been trying to teach them. This is that moment. After weeks of quiet thinking, honest conversations with themselves, and countless nights spent searching for clarity instead of easy answers, they finally understood that the words they had heard had not changed their life on their own. Those words had simply awakened a truth that had been patiently waiting inside them all along. The real transformation happened because they finally chose to listen. For so long they believed that change required dramatic events. They imagined that life would somehow provide a perfect sign, a perfect opportunity, or a perfect moment before anything truly meaningful could happen. Now they smiled gently at that old belief because they understood something far more powerful. The greatest changes in life often begin quietly. They begin with one honest realization. One sincere apology. One difficult conversation. One decision to stop pretending. Those simple moments become the foundation for an entirely different future. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They no longer measured success only by accomplishments or responsibilities. Instead, they began measuring it by questions that carried far greater meaning. Did I treat people with kindness today? Did I communicate honestly? Did I listen with patience instead of preparing my next response? Did I appreciate the people who matter while I still had the chance? Those questions slowly became more important than anything else because they understood that relationships are not strengthened by good intentions alone. They are strengthened by consistent actions repeated over time. One morning they woke earlier than usual and stepped outside before sunrise. The world felt unusually peaceful. The streets were quiet. The air carried the freshness of a new day. As they watched the first light appear on the horizon, they realized that every sunrise quietly offers the same invitation. Yesterday cannot be changed, but today can be lived differently. They stood there for several minutes without speaking, allowing that simple truth to settle into their heart. They no longer wished to spend another year waiting for perfect circumstances before becoming the person they wanted to be. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. During the months that followed, people around them began noticing subtle but undeniable changes. They smiled more naturally because they were no longer carrying the weight of pretending everything was fine. They became calmer during disagreements because they understood that listening often creates more healing than winning an argument. They became more generous with encouragement because they knew how deeply kind words can influence someone carrying hidden burdens. Friends commented that something about them felt different. Family members noticed they seemed more peaceful. They simply smiled because they understood that peace arrives when a person's actions finally align with their values. One afternoon they found themselves thinking about the people who had quietly shaped their life without ever realizing it. Teachers who encouraged them. Friends who remained loyal during difficult seasons. Family members who believed in them when they doubted themselves. And among those memories appeared someone whose quiet authenticity had left a lasting impression. They remembered how respected they had always felt during conversations. They remembered feeling accepted instead of judged. They remembered how naturally honesty flowed whenever they were together. Those memories no longer created sadness. They created gratitude. Gratitude that life had allowed them to experience a connection built upon sincerity rather than appearances. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They also realized something important about forgiveness. For years they believed forgiveness meant forgetting painful experiences. Now they understood something much wiser. Forgiveness means refusing to allow yesterday's mistakes to prevent tomorrow's growth. It means accepting responsibility without living forever inside regret. It means choosing wisdom over resentment. That understanding brought freedom they had never experienced before. As they continued growing, they noticed another change within themselves. They no longer rushed through important conversations. They gave people their full attention. They stopped checking their phone while someone else was speaking. They asked meaningful questions instead of making assumptions. They thanked people sincerely instead of believing gratitude was already understood. These ordinary habits transformed every relationship in their life because authentic connection is built through everyday consistency rather than occasional dramatic gestures. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. There were still difficult days. Growth never removes every challenge. Some mornings uncertainty still appeared. Some evenings old memories returned unexpectedly. Yet those moments no longer controlled them. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen?" they now asked, "How can this help me become wiser?" That simple shift changed everything. Every disappointment became another opportunity to practice compassion. Every misunderstanding became another invitation to improve communication. Every challenge became another reminder that character is formed through perseverance. They also discovered that emotional safety is one of the greatest gifts two people can offer each other. It is created when honesty is welcomed instead of punished. It grows when respect remains present even during disagreement. It becomes stronger whenever both people choose understanding before judgment. Looking back, they realized that the relationships they valued most had always been built upon those quiet foundations. They promised themselves never again to overlook those qualities while searching for temporary excitement. Listen to this because your heart needs this right now. They often thought about the conversation that had changed everything. At first they believed those words had challenged them. Now they understood those words had actually set them free. They had been given permission to stop pretending. Permission to examine their life honestly. Permission to become someone whose choices reflected their deepest values instead of other people's expectations. That freedom became one of the greatest gifts they had ever received. Months later they opened the journal they had filled during this journey. Reading the earliest pages felt like meeting a completely different person. The first entries were filled with uncertainty, fear, and unanswered questions. The final pages reflected hope, clarity, humility, and quiet confidence. They realized the greatest transformation had not happened around them. It had happened within them. Their circumstances had not magically become perfect. Their perspective had simply become healthier. Don't scroll because your heart needs this right now. Think about your own journey for a moment. Every difficult season has offered lessons that comfort could never teach. Every disappointment has revealed hidden strength. Every meaningful relationship has quietly shaped the person you are becoming. Growth is rarely dramatic while it is happening. Most of the time it unfolds through ordinary choices made consistently over long periods of time. One honest conversation. One thoughtful decision. One act of kindness. One moment of courage. Those small choices eventually create an entirely different life. As this fictional story reaches its final chapter, one truth remains brighter than every question that came before it. The conversation that changed everything was never really about changing another person. It was about awakening the courage to become more authentic, more compassionate, more emotionally honest, and more intentional with every important relationship. They finally understood that meaningful connections deserve attention before distance grows, gratitude before opportunities fade, forgiveness before bitterness takes root, and honesty before silence becomes habit. And perhaps that is the lasting message hidden inside this journey. The most extraordinary transformation is not finding a perfect life. It is becoming a person who values integrity over appearances, understanding over assumptions, patience over pride, and genuine connection over superficial comfort. When someone chooses to live that way, every relationship has the opportunity to become stronger, every conversation becomes more meaningful, and every new chapter begins with a heart that is no longer guided by fear but by wisdom, kindness, authenticity, and hope.